Welcome to the discussion. My guests today, Lance Spencer, the Client Executive Vice President for the Air Force at AT&T Public Sector. Lance, welcome to the discussion.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Bill Lancey, the Client Executive Vice President for Navy and Marine Corps at AT&T Public Sector. Bill, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for hosting us.
And Jamie Gatto, the Client Executive Director for Navy Enterprise Networks for AT&T Public Sector. Jamie, welcome to the discussion.
Thanks for having us.
IT modernization is one of those topics that every agency is facing. And one of the big changes that we're seeing across not just DoD, but across every agency is the move away from what people call purpose-built networks. And maybe let me start with Bill. Why is that change happening, and what does that mean for this push toward IT modernization?
So from the Navy's perspective, the problem statement is actually quite simple, and I'm sure my peers on the Air Force and even the Army side will agree. The Navy has their network infrastructure is primarily composed of purpose-built networks. So think TDM for voice and think bursty data for email. These networks were not built for high-capacity, real-time applications like voice and video.
You know, if I can add to that, one thing that I think is really important when you think about IT modernization, and you think about the Department of Defense, the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Army, is the ability to scale. It's a global mission. And the way the DoD does their networks today just really isn't scalable. Buying purpose-built equipment, trying to keep that investment in modernization going over time is hugely expensive. So migrating to modern technologies, I believe, will help the DoD keep its footprint, keep its modern infrastructure in place and services. And I think really important is cybersecurity. The antiquated IT infrastructure in the DoD, I think, is extremely vulnerable. So keeping a modern baseline in place that scales, that's resilient, is absolutely vital, I think, to their missions.
Right, and Lance is right on track with that. The DoD and the Navy have to be agile and transform. Think of it as modernizing or mobilizing the warfighter to move capability, actionable intelligence, and decision-making to the tactical edge. What that will do is give our military a decisive competitive advantage over their adversaries.
And mobility isn't just about, laptops and cell phones, right? Mobility also refers to the fact that the mission itself moves. One of the big problems with the purpose-built networks that we've seen is that somebody 15 years ago sort of thought about how the Navy was going to fight, right? And then built a network to support that idea of the world. And unfortunately, that isn't necessarily the way that they're going to fight and the way that they need to move data around. And so moving away from that and starting to modernize into some technologies I think we're going to talk about here in a minute with software-defined networking, network function virtualization, but simply just moving away from trying to predestine the way that network needs to work is going to allow a lot more flexibility and a lot more agility for the Navy to meet its mission there.
Let me put a finer point on this, because I think when people hear the term purpose-built networks, that means we built it to connect A to B, and that's all it does.
That's largely the case. In many cases, when we say purpose-built, a decision was made, for instance, that a certain location was going to be where all the data needed to go. And so a hub and spoke architecture was laid out that connected all of those sort of satellite locations into this place where we thought all of the data was going to need to go. And unfortunately, as sort of we've moved into IP networking, right? This is a transition that's been ongoing for 15 to 20 years at this point. But as everything has sort of transitioned over to IP, we find that the traffic patterns don't actually look like that. That one hub location is not where all the data needs to go. And this gets even more magnified as we start to look at moving things to the cloud, right? And what we would have historically characterized as east-west traffic, right? So traffic that was staying within the military network boundaries is now moving north and south, right? It's headed to the cloud. It's coming back. It's getting services from another agency or another one of the services. And that simply wasn't accounted for when these networks were originally built.
You know, what's interesting, you talk about purpose-built and connecting A to B and building on what Jamie just said. The legacy approach to doing things is you get a circuit and you connect A to B. And so we're doing the first Air Force as a network as a service rollout as part of the risk reduction that the Air Force is doing, exploring how to do modern networking services as opposed to building and provisioning it for themselves. And at one base that we're doing it at, for example, there are dozens of circuits coming off that base. And each individual circuit is paid for by somebody in the DoD, and it's static, and it connects A to B, and that's it. The way we're delivering network as a service is you have a single access, and then you're connected to the network, and you can access anybody that's also connected to the network, which is amazing. It's a one-to-many, many-to-many kind of relationship that doesn't exist today. The DoD is fast racing to the cloud. Everybody wants to go to the cloud, and my first question is, how are you going to get there? The network. You got to take care of the network before you take care of the data services and everything else that's going right on the network.
Right. Now, the pathway to this technology change is going from a point-type solutions to enterprise services and converged network services, or voice, data, and video. It's a stepwise path that you need to take. It kind of starts with a use case to get the proof points behind what is the business case for doing this, what are the benefits, the key cost drivers, taking cost out. And then the next step, right? And again, it's a culture change too that goes along with that requires top-down buy-in, top-down and bottom-up. And second to that is again a prototyping, right? I think the Air Force is doing that with a 5-base pilot. Mm-hmm. I think that the Navy's been adopting RPPs.